When a wise man, established well in virtue, develops consciousness and understanding, then as a bhikkhu, ardent and sagacious, he succeeds in disentangling this tangle. This was said, but why was it said? While the Blessed One was living at Savatthi, it seems a certain deity came to him in the night, and in order to do away with his doubts, he asked this question: the inner tangle and the outer tangle, this generation is entangled in a tangle, and so I ask of Gautama this question: who succeeds in disentangling this tangle? Here is the meaning in brief. Tangle is a term for the network of craving. For that is a tangle in the sense of lacing together like the tangle called network of branches in bamboo thickets, etc. Because it goes on arising again and again, up and down among the objects of consciousness, beginning with what is visible. But it is called the inner tangle and the outer tangle because it arises as craving for one's own requisites and another's, for one's own person and another's, and for internal and external bases for consciousness. Since it arises in this way, this generation is entangled in a tangle. As the bamboos, etc., are entangled by the bamboo tangle, etc., so too this generation, in other words, this order of living beings, is all entangled by the tangle of craving. The meaning is that it is intertwined, interlaced by it. And because it is entangled like this, so I ask of Gautama this question. That is why I ask this. He addressed the Blessed One by his clan name, Gautama, who succeeds in disentangling this tangle. Who may disentangle this tangle that keeps three kinds of existence entangled in this way? What he asks is, who is capable of disentangling it? However, when questioned thus, the Blessed One, whose knowledge of all things is unimpeded, deity of deities, excelling Sakka, ruler of gods, excelling Brahma, fearless in the possession of the four kinds of perfect confidence, wielder of the 10 powers, all-seer with unobstructed knowledge, uttered this stanza in reply to explain the meaning. When a wise man, established well in virtue, develops consciousness and understanding, then as a bhikkhu, ardent and sagacious, he succeeds in disentangling his tangle. My task is now to set out the true sense, divided into virtue and the rest. Of this same verse composed by the great sage, there are here in the victor's dispensation seekers gone forth from home to homelessness, and who, although desiring purity, have no right knowledge of the sure straight way, comprising virtue and the other two, right hard to find, that leads to purity, who, though they strive, here gain no purity. To them I shall expound the comforting path of purification, pure in expositions, relying on the teaching of the dwellers in the great monastery. Let all those good men who do desire purity listen intently to my exposition. Herein purification should be understood as Nibbana, which being devoid of all stains is utterly pure. The path of purification is the path to that purification. It is the means of approach that is called the path. The meaning is, I shall expound that path of purification. In some instances, this path of purification is taught by insight alone, according as it is said. The great formations are all impermanent. When he sees thus with understanding and turns away from what is ill, that is the path to purity. And in some instances, by jhana and understanding, according as it is said, he is near unto Nibbana, in whom are jhana and understanding. And in some instances, by deeds, karma, etc., according to it is said, by deeds, vision and righteousness, by virtue, the sublimest life. By these are mortals purified, and not by lineage and wealth. And in some instances by virtue, etc., according as it is said, he who is possessed of constant virtue, who has understanding and is concentrated, who is strenuous and diligent as well, will cross the flood so difficult to cross. And in some instances by the foundations of mindfulness, etc., according as it is said, because this path is the only way for the purification of beings, for the realization of Nibbana, that is to say, the four foundations of mindfulness. And similarly in the case of the right efforts, and so on. But in the answer to the question, it is taught by virtue and other too. Here is a brief commentary on the stanza. Established well in virtue, standing on virtue, it is only one actually fulfilling virtue who is here said to stand on virtue. So the meaning here is this: being established well in virtue, by fulfilling virtue, a man, a living being, wise, possessing the kind of understanding that is born of karma, by means of a rebirth linking with triple root cause, develops consciousness and understanding, develops both concentration and insight. For it is concentration that is described here under the heading of consciousness, and insight under that of understanding. Ardent, atapin, possessing energy, for it is energy that is called ardor, atapa, in the sense of burning up the consuming. Atapana, paritapana, defilements. He has that, thus he is that ardent. Sagacious it is, understanding that is called sagacity. Possessing that is the meaning. This word shows protective understanding, for understanding is mentioned 3 times in the reply to the question. Herein the first is naive understanding, the second understanding consisting in insight, while the third is the protective understanding that guides all affairs. He sees fear, bhayam, ikati, in the round of rebirths, and thus he is a bhikkhu. He succeeds in disentangling this tangle. Just as a man standing on the ground and taking up a well-sharp knife might disentangle a great tangle of bamboos, so too he, this bhikkhu, who possesses the 6 things, namely this virtue and this concentration described under the heading of consciousness, and this threefold understanding and his ardor, standing on the ground of virtue, and taking up with the hand of protective understanding, exerted by the power of energy, the knife of insight, understanding, well sharpened on the stone of concentration, might disentangle, cut away and demolish all the tangle of craving that had overgrown his own life's continuity. But it is at the moment of the path that he is said to be disentangling that tangle. At the moment of fruition, he has disentangled the tangle and is worthy of the highest offerings in the world with its deities. That is why the Blessed One said, when a wise man established well in virtue develops consciousness and understanding, then as a bhikkhu ardent and sagacious, he succeeds in disentangling this tangle. Herein there is nothing for him to do about the naive understanding on account of which he is called wise, for that has been established in him simply by the influence of previous karma. But the words ardent and sagacious mean that by preserving with energy of the kind here described, and by acting in full awareness with understanding, he should have become well established in virtue, develop the serenity and insight that are described as concentration and understanding. This is how the Blessed One shows the path of purification under the headings of virtue, concentration and understanding there. What has been shown so far is the 3 trainings, the dispensation that is good in 3 ways, the necessary condition for the threefold clear vision, etc., the avoidance of the 2 extremes and the cultivation of the middle way, the means to surmounting the states of loss, etc., the abandoning of defilements in 3 aspects, prevention of transgression, etc., purification from the 3 kinds of defilements, and the reason for the states of stream entry, and so on. How? Here the training of higher virtue is shown by virtue, the training of higher consciousness by concentration, and the training of higher understanding by understanding. The dispensation's goodness in the beginning is shown by virtue, because of the passage and what is the beginning of the profitable things. Virtue that is quite purified, and because of the passage beginning, the not doing of any evil. Virtue is the beginning of the dispensation, and that is good because it brings about the special qualities of non-remorse, and so on. Its goodness in the middle is shown by concentration, because of the passage beginning, entering upon the profitable. Concentration is the middle of the dispensation, and that is good because it brings about the special qualities of supernormal power, and so on. Its goodness in the end is shown by understanding, because of the passage, the purifying of the one's own mind. This is the Buddha's dispensation, And because understanding is its culmination, understanding is the end of the dispensation. And that is good because it brings about equipoise with respect to the desired and the undesired. For this is said, just as a solid massive rock remains unshaken by the wind, so too in face of blame and praise, the wise remain immovable. Likewise, the necessary condition for the triple clear vision is shown by virtue. For with the support of perfected virtue one arrives at the three kinds of clear vision. But nothing besides that. The necessary condition for the 6 kinds of direct knowledge is shown by concentration. For with the support of perfect concentration one arrives at the 6 kinds of direct knowledge, but nothing besides that. The necessary condition for the categories of discrimination is shown by understanding. For with the support of perfected understanding one arrives at the 4 kinds of discrimination, but not for any other reason. And the avoidance of extreme, called devotion to indulgence of sense desires, is shown by virtue. The avoidance of extreme, called devotion to mortification of self, is shown by concentration. The cultivation of the middle way is shown by understanding. Likewise, the means for surmounting the states of loss is shown by virtue. The means for surmounting the element of sense desires by concentration, and the means for surmounting all becoming by understanding. And the abandoning of defilements by the substitution of opposites is shown by virtue. That by suppression is shown by concentration, and that by cutting off is shown by understanding. Likewise, prevention of defilements, transgression, is shown by virtue. Prevention of obsession by defilement is shown by concentration. Prevention of inherent tendencies is shown by understanding. And purification from defilement of misconduct is shown by virtue. Purification from the defilement of craving by concentration, and purification from defilement of false views by understanding. Likewise, the reason for the states of stream entry and one's return is shown by virtue. That for the state of non-return by concentration, that for arahatship by understanding, for the stream enterer is called perfected in the kinds of virtue, and likewise the once returner, but the non-returner is called perfected in concentration. And the arahat is called perfected in understanding. So thus far, these 9 and other like triads of special qualities have been shown. That is, the 3 trainings, the dispensation that is good in 3 ways, the necessary condition for the threefold clear vision, the avoidance of 2 extremes and the cultivation of the middle way, the means for surmounting the states of loss, etc., the abandoning of defilements in 3 aspects, prevention of transgression, etc., purification from the 3 kinds of defilements, and the reason for the states of stream entry, and so on. However, even when this path of purification is shown in this way under the headings of virtue, concentration and understanding, each comprising various special qualities, it is still only shown extremely briefly. And so, since this is insufficient to help all, there is, in order to show it in detail, the following set of questions dealing in the first place with virtue. What is virtue? In what sense is virtue? What are its characteristic function, manifestation, and proximate cause? What are the benefits of virtue? How many kinds of virtue are there? What is the defiling of it? What is the cleansing of it? Here are the answers. What is virtue? It is the states beginning with volition present in one who abstains from killing living things, etc., or in one who fulfills the practice of the duties. For this is said in the Patisambhidhana. Patisambhidha, what is virtue? There is virtue as volition, virtue as consciousness concomitant, virtue as restraint, virtue as non-transgression. Herein, virtue as volition is the volition present in one who abstains from killing living things, etc., or in one who fulfills the practice of duties. Virtue as consciousness concomitant is the abstinence in one who abstains from killing living things, and so on. Furthermore, virtue as a volition is the 7 volitions that accompany the first 7 of the 10 courses of action, karma, in one who abandons the killing of living things, and so on. Virtue as consciousness concomitant is the 3 remaining states consisting of non-covetousness, non-ill will, and right view, stated in the way beginning. Abandoning covetousness, he dwells with a mind free from covetousness. Virtue as restraint should be understood here as restraint in 5 ways. Restraint by the rules of community, patimokha, restraint by mindfulness, restraint by knowledge, restraint by patience, and restraint by energy. Herein, restraint by patimokha is this: he is furnished, fully furnished with his patimokha restraint. Restraint by mindfulness, this he guards the eye faculty, enters upon restraint of the eye faculty. Restraint by knowledge, this is the currents in the world that flow, ajita, said the Blessed One, are stemmed by means of mindfulness. Restraint of currents, I proclaim, by understanding they are damned. And use of requisites is here combined with this. But what is called restraint by patience is that given in the way of beginning. He is one who bears cold the heat, one who bears cold and heat. And what is called restraint by energy is that given in the way beginning. He does not endure a thought of sense desires when it arises. Purification of livelihood is here combined with this. So this 5-fold restraint and the abstinence in clansmen who dread evil from any chance of transgression met with, should all be understood to be virtue as restraint. Virtue as non-transgression is the non-transgression by body or speech of precepts of virtue that have been undertaken. This, in the first place, is the answer to the question, what is virtue? Now as to the rest. In what sense is virtue? It is virtue, sila, in the sense of composing sila. Silana. What is this composing? It is either coordinating samadhana, meaning non-inconsistency of bodily action, etc., due to virtuousness, or It is an upholding, upadharana, meaning a state of basis, adhara, owing to its serving as foundation for profitable states. For those who understand etymology, admit only these two meanings. Others, however, comment on the meaning here in the way beginning. The meaning of virtue, sila, is the meaning of head, sira. The meaning of virtue is the meaning of cool, sitala. Now, what are its characteristic function, manifestation, and proximate cause here? The characteristic of it is composing, even when analyzing in various ways, as visibility is of visible data, even when analyzed in various ways, just as visibleness is the characteristic of the visible database, even when analyzed into various categories of blue, yellow, etc. Because even when analyzed into these categories, it does not exceed visibleness. So also this same composing described above as the coordinating of bodily action, etc., and as the foundation of profitable states, is the characteristic of virtue even when analyzed into the various categories of volition, etc. Because even when analyzed into the categories, it does not exceed the state of coordination and foundation. While such is its characteristic, its function has a double sense. Action to stop misconduct, then achievement as the quality of blamelessness in virtuous men. So what is called virtue should be understood to have the function nature of stopping misconduct as its function nature in the sense of action, and a blameless function nature as its function nature in the sense of achievement. For under these headings, characteristic, etc., it is action, kiccha, or it is achievement, sampatti, that is called function, rasa, nature. Now virtue, so say those who know, itself as purity will show, and for its proximate cause they tell, the pair conscience and shame as well. This virtue is manifested as the kinds of purity stated thus: bodily purity, verbal purity, mental purity. It is manifested, comes to be apprehended as a pure state. But conscience and the shame are said by those who know to be its proximate cause. Its near reason is the meaning. For when conscience and shame are in existence, virtue arises and persists. And when they are not, it neither arises nor persists. This is how virtue characteristic, function, manifestation, and proximate cause should be understood. What are the benefits of virtue? Its benefits are acquisition of the several special qualities beginning with non-remorse. For this is said, Ananda, profitable habits, virtues, have non-remorse as their aim and non-remorse as their benefit. Also, it is said further, householder, there are these 5 benefits for the virtuous in the perfecting of virtue. What 5? Here, householder, one who is virtuous, possessed of virtue, obtains a large fortune as a consequence of diligence. This is the first benefit for the virtuous in the perfecting of virtue. Again, of one who is virtuous, possessed of virtue, A fair name is spread abroad. This is the second benefit for the virtuous in the perfecting of virtue. Again, whenever one who is virtuous, possessed of virtue, enters an assembly, whether of Khatyas, warrior nobles, or Brahmans, or householders, or ascetics, he does so without fear or hesitation. This is the third benefit for the virtuous in the perfecting of virtue. Again, one who is virtuous, possessed of virtue, dies unconfused. This is the fourth benefit for virtuous in the perfecting of virtue. Again, one who is virtuous, possessed of virtue on the breakup of the body after death, reappears in a happy destiny in the heavenly world. This is the fifth benefit for the virtuous in the perfecting of virtue. There are also the many benefits of virtue, beginning with being dear and loved and ending with destruction of cankers described in the passage beginning. If a bhikkhu should wish, may I be dear to my fellows in the life of purity and loved by them, held in respect and honored by them, let him perfect the virtues. This is how virtue has its benefits, the several special qualities, beginning with non-remorse. Furthermore, dare anyone a limit place on benefits that virtue brings, without which virtue clansmen find no footage in the dispensation, no Ganges and no Yamuna, no Sarabhu Sarasati, or flowing of Achirvati, or noble river of Mahi, is able to wash out the stain in things that breathe here in the world. For only virtue's water can wash out the stain in living things. No breezes that come bringing rain, no balm of yellow sandalwood, no necklaces beside or gems, or soft effulgence of moonbeams can here avail to calm and soothe men's fevers in this world, whereas this noble, this supremely cool, well-guarded virtue quells the flame. Where is there to be found the scent that can with virtue's scent compare, and that is borne against the wind as easily as with it? Where can such another stir be found that climbs as virtue does to heaven, or yet another door that gives unto the city of Nibbana? Shine as they may, there are no kings adorned with jewelry and pearls that shine as does a man restrained, adorned with virtue's ornament. Virtue entirely does away with dread of self-blame and the like. Their virtue to the virtuous gives gladness always by its flame, by its fame. From this brief sketch it may be known how virtue brings reward, and how this root of all good qualities robs of its power every fault. Now here is the answer to the question, how many kinds of virtue are there? Firstly, all this virtue is of one kind by reason of its own characteristic of composing. It is of two kinds, as keeping and avoiding, likewise that of good behavior and that of beginning of the life of purity, as abstinence and non-abstinence, as dependent and independent, as temporary and lifelong, as limited and unlimited, as mundane and supramundane. It is of three kinds, as inferior, medium, and superior, likewise as giving precedence to self, giving precedence to the world, and giving precedence to the Dhamma, as adhered to, not adhered to, and tranquilized, as purified, unpurified, and dubious, as that of the trainer, that of the non-trainer, and that of the neither trainer nor non-trainer. It is of four kinds, as partaking of diminution and stagnation, of distraction, of penetration, likewise as that of bhikkhus, of bhikkhunis, of the not fully admitted, of the laity. As natural, customary, necessary, due to previous causes, as virtue of patimokkha restraint of sense faculties, of purification of livelihood, and that concerning requisites. It is of five kinds, as virtue consisting in limited purification, etc. For this is said in the Patisambhidha, five kinds of virtue. Virtue consisting in limited purification, virtue consisting in unlimited purification, virtue consisting in fulfilled purification, virtue consisting in unadhered to purification, virtue consisting in tranquil purification, likewise as abandoning, refraining, volition, restraint, and non-transgression. Herein, in the section dealing with that of one kind, the meaning should be understood as already stated. In the section dealing with that of two kinds, fulfilling a training precept announced by the Blessed One thus: this should be done is keeping, not going what is prohibited by him thus. This should not be done is avoiding. Herein the word meaning is this: they keep charanti, within that they proceed as people who fulfill the virtues. Thus it is keeping charita. They preserve, they protect, they avoid. Thus it is avoiding. Herein keeping is accomplished by faith and energy. Avoiding by faith and mindfulness. This is how it is of two kinds as keeping and avoiding. In the second dyad, good behavior is the best kind of behavior. Good behavior itself is that of good behavior, or what is announced for the sake of good behavior is that of good behavior. This is a term for virtue other than that which has livelihood as eighth. It is the initial stage of the life of purity consisting in the path. Thus it is that of the beginning of the life of purity. This is a term for the virtue that has livelihood as eighth. It is the initial stage of path because it has actually to be purified in the prior stage too. Hence it is said, but his bodily action, his verbal action, and his livelihood have already been purified earlier. All the training precepts called lesser and minor are that of good behavior. The rest are that of beginning of the life of purity, or what is included in the double code. The bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, patimokkha, is that of beginning of the life of purity, and that included in the duties set out in the khandakas of Vinaya, is that of good behavior. Through its perfection, that of the beginning of the life of purity comes to be perfected. Hence it is said also that this bhikkhu shall fulfill the state consisting in the beginning of the life of purity without having fulfilled the state consisting in the good behavior. That is not possible. So it is of two kinds, as that of good behavior and that of beginning of the life of purity. In the third dyad, virtue as abstinence is simply abstention from killing living things, etc. The other kinds consisting in volition, etc., are virtue as non-abstinence. So it is of two kinds, as abstinence and non-abstinence. In the fourth dyad, there are two kinds of dependence: dependence through craving and dependence through false views. Herein that produced by one who wishes for a fortunate kind of becoming. Thus, through this virtuous conduct, right, I shall become a great deity or some minor deity, is dependent through craving. That produced through such false view about purification, as purification is through virtuous conduct, is dependent through false view. But the supramundane and the mundane, that is the prerequisite for aforesaid supramundane, are independent. So it is of two kinds, as dependent and independent. In the fifth dyad, temporarily, virtue is that undertaken after deciding on a time limit. Lifelong virtue is that practiced in the same way, but undertaking it for as long as life lasts. So it is of two kinds, as temporary and lifelong. In the sixth dyad, the limited is that seen to be limited by gain, fame, relatives, limbs, or life. The opposite is unlimited, that this is said in Patisamviddha. What is virtue that has a limit? There is virtue that has gain as its limit. There is virtue that has fame as its limit. There is virtue that has relatives as its limit. There is virtue that has limbs as its limit. There is virtue that has life as its limit. There is virtue that has gain as its limit. Here, someone with gain as cause, with gain as condition, with gain as reason, transgresses a training precept as undertaken. That virtue has gain as its limit. And the rest should be elaborated in the same way. Also in the answer, dealing with the unlimited, it is said, what is virtue that does not have gain as its limit? Here someone does not, with gain as cause, with gain as condition, with gain as reason, even arouse thought of transgressing a training precept as undertaken. How then shall he actually transgress it? The virtue does not have gain as its limit. Patis and the rest should be elaborated in the same way. So it is of two kinds, as limited and unlimited. In the seventh dyad, all virtue subject to cankers is mundane. That not subject to cankers is supramundane. Therein the mundane brings about improvement in future becoming and is a prerequisite for the escape from becoming. According as it is said, discipline is for the purpose of restraint. Restraint is for the purpose of non-remorse. Non-remorse is for the purpose of gladdening. Gladdening is for the purpose of happiness. Happiness is for the purpose of tranquility. Tranquility is for the purpose of bliss. Bliss is for the purpose of concentration. Concentration is for the purpose of correct knowledge and vision, knowledge and vision. Correct knowledge and vision is for the purpose of dispassion. Dispassion is for the purpose of fading away of greed. Fading away is for the purpose of deliverance. Deliverance is for the purpose of knowledge and vision of deliverance. Knowledge and vision of deliverance is for the purpose of complete extinction of craving, etc. Through not clinging, talk has that purpose, counsel has that purpose, support has that purpose, giving ear has that purpose. That is to say, the liberation of the mind through not clinging. The supramundane brings about the escape from becoming and is the plane of reviewing knowledge. So it is of two kinds of mundane and supramundane. In the first of the triads, the inferior is produced by inferior zeal. Purify inferior zeal, consciousness, energy, or inquiry. The medium is produced by medium zeal, etc. The superior by superior zeal, and so on. That undertaken out of desire for fame is inferior. That undertaken out of desire for the fruits of merit is medium. That undertaken for the sake of the noble state, thus this has to be done, is superior. Or again, that defiled by self-praise and disparagement of others, etc. Thus, I am possessed of virtue, but these other bhikkhus are ill-conducted and evil-natured. Is inferior, undefiled, mundane virtue, is medium, supramundane is superior. Or again, that motivated by craving, the purpose of which is to enjoy continued existence, is inferior. That practiced for the purpose of one's own deliverance is medium. The virtue of the perfections practiced for the deliverance of all beings is superior. So it is of three kinds, as inferior, medium, and superior. In the second triad, that practiced out of self-regard by one who regards self and desires to abandon what is unbecoming to self, is virtue giving precedence to self. That practiced out of regard for the world and out of desire to ward off the censure of the world is virtue giving precedence to the world. That practiced out of regard for the Dhamma and out of desire to honor the majesty of the Dhamma is virtue giving precedence to the Dhamma. So it is of three kinds, as giving precedence to self, and so on. In the third triad, the virtue that in the dyads was called dependent is adhered to because it is adhered to through craving and falls pure. That practiced by magnanimous ordinary man as the prerequisite of the path, and that associated with the path in trainers are not adhered to. That associated with trainers and non-trainers, fruition is tranquilized. So it is of three kinds, as adhered to, and so on. In the fourth triad, that fulfilled by one who has committed no offense, or has made amends after committing once one is pure. So long as he has not made amends after committing an offense, it is impure. Virtue in one who is dubious about whether a thing constitutes an offense, or about what grade of offense has been committed, or about whether he has committed an offense, is dubious. Herein the meditator should purify impure virtue. If dubious, he should avoid cases about which he is doubtful, and should get his doubts cleared up. In this way his mind will be kept at rest. So it is of three kinds, as pure, and so on. In the fifth triad, the virtue associated with the four paths and with the first three fruitions is that of the trainer. That associated with the fruition of arahatship is that of the non-trainer. The remaining kinds are that of the neither trainer nor non-trainer. So it is of three kinds as that of the trainer, and so on. But in the world, the nature of such and such beings is called their habit, sila, of which they say, this one is of happy habit, sukha sila. This one is of unhappy habit. This one is of quarrelsome habit. This one is of dandified habit. Because of that, it is said in the Patisambhidana, figuratively, three kinds of virtue: habit, profit virtue, unprofitable virtue, intermediate virtue. So it is also called the three kinds as profitable, and so on. Of these, the unprofitable is not included here, since it has nothing whatever to do with the headings beginning with the characteristic, which define virtue in the sense intended in this chapter. So the threefoldness should be understood only in the way already stated. In the first of the tetrads, the unvirtuous he cultivates. He visits not the virtuous, and in his ignorance he sees not fault in the transgression here. With wrong thoughts often in his mind, his faculties he will not guard. Virtue in such constitution comes to partake of diminution. But he whose mind is satisfied with virtue that has been achieved, who never thinks to stir himself and take a meditation subject up, contented with mere virtuousness, nor striving for a higher state, his virtue bears the appellation of that partaking of stagnation. But who, possessed of virtue, strives with concentration for his aim, that bhikkhu's virtue is in its function, is called partaking of distinction. Who finds mere virtue not enough, but has dispassion for his goal, his virtue through such aspiration comes to partake of penetration. So it is of four kinds as partaking of diminution, and so on. In the second tetrad, there are training precepts announced for bhikkhus to keep irrespective of what is announced for bhikkhus. This is the virtue of bhikkhus. There are training precepts announced for bhikkhus to keep irrespective of what is announced for bhikkhus. This is the virtue of bhikkhus. The 10 precepts of virtue for male and female novices are the virtue of the not fully admitted. The 5 training precepts, 10 when possible, as permanent undertaking, and 8 as the factors of Uposatati for male and female lay followers, are the virtue of the laity. So it is of 4 kinds as the virtue of the bhikkhus, and so on. In the third tetrad, the non-transgression on the path of Uttara Kuru, human beings, is natural virtue. Each clan's or localities or sects' own rules of conduct are customary virtue. The virtue of the Bodhisattva's mother, described thus, is the necessary rule, Ananda, that when Bodhisattva has descended into his mother's womb, no thought of men that is connected with the cords of sense desire comes to her, is necessary virtue. But the virtue of such pure beings as Maha Kassapa, etc., and of Bodhisattva in his various births is virtue due to previous causes. So it is of four kinds as natural virtue, and so on. In the fourth tetrad, the virtue described by the Blessed One thus: here a bhikkhu dwells restrained with patimokkha restraint, possessed of the proper conduct and resort, and seeing fear in the slightest fault, he trains himself by undertaking the precepts of training. Is virtue patimokkha restraint? That described thus: on seeing a visible object with eye, he apprehends neither the signs nor the particulars through which, if he felt the eye faculty unguarded, evil and unprofitable states of covetousness and grief might invade him. He enters upon the way of its restraint. He guards the eye faculty, undertakes the restraint of the eye faculty. On hearing a sound with the ear, on smelling an odor with the nose, on tasting a flavor with the tongue, on uposatha, to observe or to prepare is the name for the day of fasting or vigil, observed on the days of the new moon, waxing half moon, full moon and waning half moon. On these days it is customary for laymen to undertake the 8 precepts, sila, or 5 precepts. On the new moon and full moon days, the patimokkha is recited by the bhikkhus. The 2 quarter moon days are called the 8th of the half moon. The full moon day is called 15th. In other words, 15 days from the new moon, and is the last day of the lunar month. That of new moon is called 14th. When it is the second and the 4th new moon of the 4-month season, in other words 14 days from the full moon, the other 2 are called 14th. The other 2 are called 15th. This compensates for the irregularities of the lunar period. Touching a tangible object with the body, on cognizing a mental object with the mind, he apprehends neither